The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Well, hello. Welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip.
And I'm CJ.
And it's Friday, and we have a guest. But before, we got a quick cleanup for all you fact checkers and people who historically want to be historically accurate. I believe on the last show, I spoke about my mother growing up in I believe I said it was Lebanon. It was Lebanon, but it wasn't. It was not Lebanon technically. It was Syria. Lebanon had become an independent nation until 1943. And actually, when she came back to this country, she was born here and went back as an infant, as I said. Actually, her port of embarkation is listed as Beirut, Syria. So, just for the record, so we can get that out of the way, so we don't have people saying, you said, there's no such place as Lebanon." There was, but it was just a district. And now we're going to get into our show, and today we're pleased to have another guest, and you know the format we have on the first show. It's kind of like a introductory, let the candidates be able to speak at length on anything they like, introduce themselves, and I think today's going to be a good show because unlike most of the other candidates who have fairly high visibility and recognizability in Fall River, this is a candidate that may not be as well known to most of you, so this is our opportunity. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome to the show Erica Scott-Pacheco. How are you, Erica?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Chip.
Welcome.
Okay, it's all yours. I mean, if you'd like questions or if you just want to give an introductory on your background and your platform, feel free. This is kind of like the second show you're on. We'll get into specifics on various platforms, but this is kind of giving you an opportunity not to be constricted by a 1-minute time limit or a 30-second rebuttal. You can kind of just freelance, do whatever you'd like.
Sounds good. So I'll do an introduction of myself. Thank you to FRC Media, BCC, to CJ, and to Chip for having me here with this opportunity to share my ideas and platform and a little about me. So I live in the Flint. I work downtown at the nonprofit Legal Services, where I'm Director of Development, been there over 4 years. And I live in Fall River, I work in Fall River because I believe in Fall River. I believe in our city, and that's really why I'm running for mayor. No one in my family is politically connected. No one has a job at the city or the state. No one has been an elected official in my family. In many ways, I'm just like you, the viewers at home. I'm working from a working class family. My mom is a public school teacher, and I still am working full time while running for mayor, which requires a lot of diligent time management. And I think that skill will help me as your mayor. The reason I'm running for mayor is because I was a volunteer collecting recall signatures, and I heard from hundreds of voters, over thousands of them signed the petition. I talked to hundreds, and I kept hearing the same message, that our city cannot continue on this path that we're on. We can't keep electing the same people, a revolving door, and expecting different results. And so I thought about it. I have 15 years experience as a director in nonprofit fundraising and financial management, building budgets, fundraising for the budgets, reporting, proving that we did what we said we would do, and also managing teams and managing staff. And so I thought, I'm going to rise to the occasion. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and run for mayor because I have the experience and the education that will really empower me to serve as your mayor. One of my big things that I'm running on is to be fiscally conservative. I think for far too long, the city has been wasteful. I'm going to trim the fat in administration across the board, whether it's in City Hall or in the school department, because I want to focus on making sure teachers have what they need, that city workers have what they need to serve you, because that's what it's all about. The city providing services for your quality of life so that you feel safe and secure in your neighborhood.
Well, thank you. That's a good opening, and yeah, and you mentioned fiscal fiscal restraint, and
Yes.
that's something we preach on this show all the time. And you know, we see a city here that ranks at the lowest end of the spectrum as far as per capita incomes and general incomes, yet we have, you know, we have this attitude, it seems, that we spend like a Newton or a Wellesley. And give us an idea of what you feel we need to do, not only to rein in the spending, obviously, but where we have to redirect our resources and where we can trim some of the fat, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's not just reining in spending, but also bonding. So I'll give two concrete examples. I was very publicly opposed to bonding for streetscapes. When it first came up, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I went down to City Hall, a city council meeting, spoke against it. I actually work in the first completed streetscape. It cost $2.8 million. I brought the Herald News article saying it was $2.8 million of your tax dollars that we bonded to do the Purchase and Bank Street streetscape. There are zero new businesses, zero new economic development. There's no impact other than property owners. I suppose now their property values have gone up because it looks nice. I was opposed to that from the start, and I'm even more opposed, and I'm happy that the City Council is now considering reining in the other streetscapes, because keep in mind, they were separate projects, about $10 million bonding in total. I don't think that's right. I live in the Flint. There are huge potholes. I think that we need to do a comprehensive citywide roadway and sidewalk maintenance and repair plan before we start beautifying select areas of the city. That's not what you deserve. I've met with people who use scooters, who use wheelchairs, who say the roads are so bad in some places, Chip, they can't even get down the sidewalk. School kids walking to school, they need to have a safe sidewalk that they can navigate. We had a couple kids recently get hit by a car right crossing the street. I'm not saying that was because of sidewalks. It seems like it was just an irresponsible driver, but it is a concern, right? We want to try to minimize risk and make sure that our infrastructure is in good condition before we start spending in other areas for beautification. A second concrete example, I was opposed to the 2.5 override regarding the high school. And I absolutely think that we need a new Durfee. I'm glad that we're getting a new Durfee, but I wanted to do it within the tax levy. I didn't like giving a blank check for a bond. And I really am concerned about people being priced out of their homes. Housing is my #1 issue. That's really one of the reasons why I'm running and why I'm different than other candidates. I don't hear other candidates talking about the challenges that elders on fixed incomes have to stay in the city where they've lived and worked all their life.
Well, that's good points, very, very good points. And it gets us into another area that we see a lot and a lot of talk. And there seems to be a disconnect with certain of our politicians. As you well know, there was a shooting on South Main Street, that
Yes.
somebody running up and down the street. Then there was another shooting, and actually this morning they apprehended the individual who murdered the 16-year-old.
Well, that was a stabbing, but
Yeah,
it was
stabbing.
still a
Yeah, well, I mean,
violent
shootings.
crime.
Well, shooting. Yeah, violent crime. And we had the dubious distinction of being voted the most dangerous city in the state of Massachusetts and the second most dangerous. Yet our mayor got on there and said that the city is relatively safe. We know the high population of elderly people we have in this community. We have one of the highest in the state of
Bristol
elderly.
County is the highest in the state.
And
You're very correct.
So,
yeah.
So as far as that is concerned, what is your fundamental view on what we're going to do about this issue, and rather than just try to pretend it doesn't exist or try to politicize it and say, it's relatively safe?
So I know that it exists because I live in a neighborhood where many people are afraid to call the police. Actually, last summer, in the middle of the night, my downstairs neighbors, I live in a 2-family tenement, as well as many of our neighbors were awoken. Lights went on. I went downstairs and went outside. We had heard a loud explosion. It had shaken the house. It woke up my dog. We all were trying to figure out what was going on. People start pulling out their phones, and they're going on the Scanner Talk page and on the Group and Follower page, and they're saying, did you hear an explosion? People are saying they heard it on Pittman Street where I live. They heard it on Alden Street. One woman even said she saw smoke on Alden Street. And I was like, okay, we need to call 911. Could have been a transformer, could be a fire, who knows? I call 911, and the dispatcher, very nice, says he hasn't gotten any calls. No calls at all. And I said, okay, I understand your job is not to monitor social media, but I'm telling you that this happened, and there's about a dozen people who've commented on social media that they also heard something, saw something, so can you guys come check it out? And they did, but I've really been thinking about that a lot since it happened because it made me nervous. What if there had been a big fire? What if there actually were an explosion? I don't know. To this day, I don't know what happened. I know I heard a boom. It shook the house. What if an old mill had gone up in flames, right? Oftentimes when we have these like abandoned properties, dilapidated properties, homeless people go in there to get warm, maybe start a fire. It attracts drug users, drug deals, prostitution, a lot of negative elements that threaten public safety. But if people are afraid to call, then FRPD can't be everywhere, right? They're not psychic, they need to know. And so that's why one of the reasons I really want to focus on public safety and infrastructure is to do community policing. I want to increase our language access so that we have public safety officials that speak the languages of the community so everyone feels they can communicate, have good relationships. I think that our public safety officials really go above and beyond, and we need to make sure that other community members feel that they can reach out to them in case of emergency.
Well, that's true. Obviously, I have a vested interest with my background, and there have been numerous instances when people don't call. Everybody assumes that somebody else called.
Exactly.
And it happens. But that gets us into another thing. You talked about drug use and things. There's a constant ongoing debate in this city about the problems we have about bringing people, and many people misunderstand the way the system works. It's, we don't only we don't treat Fall River people in Fall River. The state basically directs them on as a bed available, and many of those people remain in the community, and there's a high resistance to, we've taken, or at least I personally have taken a position that everybody in the state should share the wealth. We should, we should try to take care of our own. It necessitates other things. But I mean, what is your position on what can we do to stem this influx that we get? Because many of these people remain in our community. It's not like when we're done with treatment, they don't go back. And one of those reasons is the accessibility of drugs in this community. And it's probably easier than a community that they've left for them to get back on. And we see the fallout and the the effects it has throughout the community, and it has a ripple effect. So, I mean, I know that's a pretty long question, but I think it's important for people. And I know we said but realistically, since you feel like you feel like you want to speak about it, feel free to give us. No, you're not constrained by a 30-second or a 1 minute. What do you feel that we can do to do this thing? And I know it's going to be a multifaceted kind of thing, but.
Right, you're exactly right. And there are a lot of things to unpack. And I think about this a lot because at my work, we do custody and guardianships. And we actually see grandparents or even now great-grandparents getting custody of grandkids or great-grandkids because one or even two generations have been affected by the opioid epidemic. And so that's why one of the things I want to do as mayor to be proactive is to do a drug-endangered children's alliance. They have these alliances all over the country. I attended a training a few months ago with the Children's Advocacy Center that was focused on doing one for Bristol County. I really want to bring it here to Fall River, and what that would entail is taking all of the stakeholders from probation, parole, the courts, district attorney's office, treatment, different agencies, FRPD, bringing them around the table and focusing on how do we stop this epidemic with keeping kids safe. Because we know now that we're seeing these intergenerational cycles. Kids do what they see, kids learn what they see other people do. And so that's why I think it's really important to focus on keeping kids safe, and that will help stop this epidemic. But there's other issues going on, right? You talked about how people are getting treatment here and then staying here. And in some ways our hands are tied because the state law is if you live in Fall River for 1 day, you're a Fall River resident. But I think you and I would agree that someone who lives here for 1 day is not the same as someone who's lived here for years, lived here their entire life, right?
Right.
I think most people would agree. I think that's fair. But by the state law, you stay 1 day, 1 night in Fall River, you become a resident. And so it is a very real situation. And I agree with you that Fall River is already doing so much, but yet we're still lacking for Fall River residents. I mean, people with actual connections to the community who are from here. And some ways our hands are tied because of the treatment system. But also there's other factors, I think, structural factors that are keeping people here. One is transportation. We have a very poor transportation system where we don't have buses after 6 o'clock at night. We have no Sunday bus service. And this is bad for the community, not just for treatment. It's bad for people trying to go grocery shopping, go to church, run errands on Sunday. It's bad for workers who work second shift and like have to buy a taxi or pay for an expensive Uber to get home. But I do think that transportation in our region is one reason that people stay here, because say they detox here and then they want to go back to Somerset, or they want to go to Dayton, or they want to go to Berkeley, and like there's no way really for them to do that. There's no for them to live in their original place of residence and to get outpatient treatment here. I've been an advocate with Bus Riders United for years, trying to get better public infrastructure. I've been to numerous sessions about South Coast Rail, put in public comments, spoken at public hearings to advocate for that as well, because we really need to work on transportation in general. But I think it also goes towards this issue of treatment and the opioid epidemic.
Well, yeah, as we said, it's a very comprehensive issue, and that's one of the problems that at least I see here. There's nothing stands alone. I mean, the community is you know, it's almost a synergistic effect that has a greater effect than the sum of the whole, because all these things are related. And one of the big problems too that we see, and at least people who have, you know, except for my military time, you know, I've basically lived my entire life in this community, and we see a lot of people that have left this community. And you know, what I see is that Fall River, and I was born and brought up in the Flint. I still live in the Flint, the general Flint, not what we consider the core of the Flint, but I grew up in the heart of the Flint. And the reality is, what I see was, when I grew up, the Flint was a vibrant, in South Main Street, we had, every store was full. We had people on Saturday walking up and down, going to various
like a self-sustained community. You had everything you needed.
And the irony of it is, people say, well, but it wasn't a rich community then. It was a blue-collar community. People had just, you know, they didn't have the greatest jobs in the world, but they had a paycheck. And that's the thing that I see, that, you know, we look at these economic fixes like Amazon's going to fix everything, and it didn't. Because we don't have that many people working at Amazon. We don't have the employability, because none of these people need training programs like they do in Germany. But what I see was, at the time, we had people working. They sustained small businesses, and the emphasis in a community like this should be on small business. And I think economic viability is one of the primary fundamentals of moving this city. We have to get people working again, and everybody talks about this. But you know, what is your philosophy on attempting to get people in Fall River back to work? Because everybody that runs for office, the first thing is jobs, 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 and then they say, well, what are we going to do? We're going to try to get Amazon or some other big company in here. And we've had a lot of new companies, and we've given out a lot of tips and burdened the taxpayers. Yet it's really, you know, we continue over the course of the year never ever employing the people in the community, and there are many reasons. But just like your you know, what your view is on this issue.
I think it's a really relevant issue to talk about today, given yesterday's announcement that Amazon's HQ2, right, headquarters 2, is not coming to Long Island City, New York, because of such public outcry over the issues you're talking about. And then what do we do? Jason Correa responds and invites them to come to our city. Keep in mind, there was a proposal submitted, right? They didn't pick us. And we already applied the same as Long Island City and the same as Boston, and like every city in the world, it feels like, or I think it was just US and Canada, applied. So we already were turned down, but he's trying, I guess, to drive the news media to get some attention on himself and saying we should have Amazon come here. I'm going to be really clear. I don't just talk about jobs. I'm talking about good jobs, because what you're talking about, Chip, are that community you grew up in. People had one job and they were able to pay their rent, to buy a car, to pay for ties at their church, public school or private school for their kids if they wanted, able to support small businesses, all in one job, right? And usually mom would be home taking care of the kids. Now people are working 2, 3 jobs, sometimes even 4 jobs. We have mom and dad working and they still can't get by because the jobs don't pay well. I'm not going to be, as mayor, focused on low-hanging fruit, which is jobs. I'm going to fight for good jobs with people of Fall River, because I know so many people, so many of you out there are really worried about paying bills. And I feel that too. Like I said, I'm still working full-time because I have student loans, I have a car payment, I have rent. I have responsibilities that I have to pay. No one is giving me anything. Everything I've earned in life is because of hard work. And so I bring up Amazon HQ2 because I think that is the wrong path. We give out way too many tax breaks to companies that may even just close down. Look what happened with Sam's Club, right? That's not far from my house. They built this huge warehouse. They put in a big parking lot, and they got a TIF for 3 years. And then what happened? Yeah. They closed down, right? Sam's Club is gone. And now we have this big abandoned building that has many restrictions because Walmart and them are like the same, they're subsidiaries or whatever. And so many other buildings or companies cannot locate in that building. We have this huge parking lot where I hear a lot of concerns about illegal dumping, and I've seen it, illegal dumping. The property is not being maintained in terms of cutting the shrubs. People experiencing homelessness going there, prostitution, drug deals, truckers parking overnight. Really, a lot of transient people are now utilizing that parking lot, and Sam's Club does nothing about it. And so they located here for a few years, they got their TIF, they didn't pay taxes, and then they left. And so really, I feel they just used our community. Amazon, a lot of people are not getting the salaries that they promised. I think very few people are getting the salaries. They said $35,000, $36,000 a year. It's $1 over minimum wage. 10-hour shifts, hard work, pretty much inaccessible from public transportation because the way the bus route is, it's like a mile walk from the bus route. And if you're working a 10-hour shift, the bus probably doesn't even run when you get off, if you get off at night. And so then you have to pay if you don't have a car, right? It's like all of these factors make economic development challenging in Fall River. And that's why we have to be smart about it. So as mayor, I'm gonna focus on good jobs, and I'm also linking education with economic development because we do have a brain drain problem, which you talked about. So I did some research and I found that Fall River metro area is tied for lowest in the country with Phoenix, Glendale, Arizona in terms of brain drain. By that I mean less than 1 in 3 2-year and 4-year degree holders stay in our area. 2/3 of them leave. And that's why, as mayor, I'm going to do a program called Fall River Fellows. It'll be similar to, collaborating with like DTA, BCC, AmeriCorps. A lot of places have internship programs, but there's no coordination. So right now, what does that look like? I get calls from people who are BCC students, UMass Dartmouth students, Roger Williams students, who call up legal services and say, I want to do an internship. Oftentimes they're like, my school will give me credit, or I can get work study, or the school will pay for it. I just don't know where to go. There's no master list of these are small businesses or nonprofits or city agencies that are willing to take a student. So I'm going to provide that coordination as mayor. I'm going to do this Fall River Fellows program. I'm going to reach out to small businesses and organizations in our city to say, do you have room for a free worker? That way we'll keep our students here. They can become homeowners, they can invest in the community. Most of my coworkers do not live in Fall River. They commute to Fall River. That's another challenge we have, right? We need people to stay in our city and to believe in Fall River. So as mayor, I'll take the first Fall River Fellow in my office, and I'll encourage all city departments to likewise find a space for a Fall River Fellow, because that way we'll start building up our middle class again in Fall River.
Well, obviously that's going to ring true with us. Actually, during our we were against the debt override, as you know, CJ and I both were, and that was one of the statistics actually we brought out about the brain drain, because I had the statistics that we retain very few people.
Right.
We're building a school to educate people to leave the city fundamentally, and one of the examples I used in this community is Blount Seafood. Blount Seafood got a TIF. Blount Seafood's a fairly successful company. And what is the only retail store they fundamentally had to close up in their own community, Fall River? Now, they got one in Warren, which is very small. Why? Because, again, we have an economy that has discretionary cash. And these programs, there are 10 million jobs. It's another statistic that we found. 10 million jobs in this country that are going unfilled because of lack of training. And we look a very short way across the border to Rhode Island, and they ran a welding program in conjunction with Electric Boat to get a needed skill to put these people in higher paying jobs, as you said. And that's the key. The key is that, and I understand you're running for mayor because of this, but that's one of the issues, the perspective of government. that it's like the panacea is, I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't know why the mayor wants to get Amazon in. We've already got it here and it hasn't cured anything. So getting more Amazon when we've already proven that very few Fall River people are employed.
They're recruiting in Rhode Island.
And I actually knew an Amazon recruiter.
Oh.
And they couldn't get anybody from Fall River because they're either, you know, they're unemployable or for whatever reason they couldn't get it. And as you said,
I think the transportation challenge is
and
also
there are many facets to that thing. But this is the whole perspective, and you know, and moving this city forward is going to be a Herculean task, but it's got to go one step at a time. And
well, and one thing about what you said, I hear so many people talking about moving forward, and I always ask, who are we moving it forward for? I'm running to move it forward for everyone, because I think current administration and a lot of my opponents still want to move it forward for their friends, for their campaign supporters, for people that live in the right neighborhood. When you talk about moving forward, you also have to make sure you're not leaving people behind, because the group that are being left behind, it keeps growing, and that's just going to bring our city down. And so that's why I'm really conscious when talking about economic development, public safety, housing. Like, I'm not leaving out certain groups of people. That's not the right thing to do.
yeah, well, I mean, fundamentally, they're our community. The problem that we have in this community is we hear about how well we're doing. It's almost like the federal government, how well we're doing, yet we have no middle class.
Right.
But we hear in Fall River, in some of these campaigns, some of the campaigns are saying how great Fall River is doing right now economically, yet we have 23% of the people living in poverty. Right. We are one of the lowest. We actually are ahead of Lawrence now, you know, as an economically depressed city. We're the most economically depressed. So there seems to be you know, just as we said with the crime issue, there seems to be a disconnect, and we need to move forward, as I said, as a whole community. But it's a major task, because we have to begin step by step, and that's the key. The key is that, you know, you're saying that we're going to move, and I'm listening to a lot of your ideas, and I you know, and frankly, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but the reality,
I think everything I say is common sense.
Yeah, it is, and the least common of senses is normally common sense. But what we hear on a campaign trail are these generalizations, and in the next show we're going to get more specific, because we want. It's easy to say I'm for public safety, I'm for jobs, I'm for this, but you know, if your answer to jobs is bringing back Amazon, well, that to me is not, as you said, we have to get jobs for the highest unemployment rate in the state, or always in the top 3 or 4. This is what we've got to do as a community, and as a candidate, this is what we're going to be looking for. And we tell our audience, and we're really pleased to have you. I see we're getting short of time, but I think people got a pretty good insight. This is what this first show was about, to let you introduce yourself, the other candidates the same way, and I think everybody's got a good perspective now of what you're looking at. And if you want to get a quick sum up before we get to the last 30 seconds, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground in general terms, but I think people have got a lot more idea of who Erica Scott-Pacheco is after today's show, I think.
And that really was my goal, because we're running a grassroots campaign. We're out door knocking, sign holding, calling voters. I'm trying to be as visible as I can to get to know you, the voters, because it is true, I don't hold previous elected office, but I think that's an asset, because my experience in the private sector will help me serve you. And it also will be, again, fixing that broken system. I'm not a typical politician, because I'm not saying that everything is rosy. When you're talking about our unemployment rate, you also have to talk about not just that number, but the median household income. So even if people are working, if you're making minimum wage, you're really not getting ahead. And so I'm going to focus on both, right? On jobs, and on good jobs that pay good wages for you and your family. So if you want someone who's going to be fiscally conservative with your tax dollars, who's focused on housing, public safety, infrastructure, and good jobs and education, I respectfully ask you vote yes on the recall and vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It's great having you. And Monday's a holiday, everybody. And next week we have Joe Camara and Jaisal Correa on for their first show, and then we'll bring everybody back, and we'll get really in depth on some of these things. And as we always tell you, educate yourself, study all their platforms. And thank you for watching.